My name is Robert Svoboda, and I'm a legal resident of Texas, meaning that I do not spend more than a few weeks each year there. I generally spend 3 months of the year in India and 4 or 5 months in Costa Rica, often a total of a couple of months in the United States as a whole, frequently a month at a year in Australia, and otherwise in different countries. I was born in Texas, grew up in Texas, Louisiana, graduated from high school and college in Oklahoma. Found myself with a college degree just a few weeks before turning 19. Didn't really know what to do next. Elected to try to get into medical school. Got into medical school. Decided that before going to medical school, it would be prudent to take a long trip to some exotic place. So I flew to Europe, went down to Africa, crossed Africa overland from the west coast to the east coast, was invited to participate in an ethnographic expedition sponsored by the National Museum of Kenya to the Pokot tribe, was invited to joined the tribe, decided that this sort of life was much more exciting than the life of being a medical student, flew to England, had my sister take my spears back to the US, had a barber cut off my mud-pack hairdo and mailed it back to the US, crossed overland to Nepal, spent 3 months in Nepal, quite enjoyably, and then heard that the Dalai Lama was giving a Kala Chakra initiation in Bodh Gaya, which is in India. So I had no real idea about what a Kala Chakra initiation was. I had vaguely heard of the Dalai Lama, but everybody was going, so I thought I should too. Arrived in Bodh Gaya in January of 1974, and I and 500,000 Tibetans and various other people were all there. And I had heard about Ayurveda first from the Peace Corps director in Nepal, Dr. Larry True. I always thought that was good. A doctor named True always seemed like a reliable doctor to have. And I met some Ayurvedic doctors while I was at this event in Bodh Gaya, and I was mightily impressed by the event itself, by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and particularly by another well-known Lama who was there, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. And I really had no idea. I had read about yoga and I had read through the Bhagavad Gita when I was in high school without really understanding any of it. But I thought to myself after this experience, whatever those people had was something I had to have too, which meant that I had no clue about how to get it, but I knew that I had to stay on in India, which required me to have a visa. So I thought, well, I'll just follow my nose and see what happens. So I took a train to Bombay, wandering around in Bombay, and one day ended up outside a restaurant just as a man and his wife and son were coming out, and asked him how the food was, and he said it was good, handed me some money, said, eat here tonight, come eat with us tomorrow. And I did that, and they said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm looking to study Ayurveda, but I don't know what to do. And he said, well, my maternal uncle chaired the committee that translated Ayurveda's most famous text into English, but he's 80-ish now, and he's not going to be of much help to you. But the people underneath us in the flat immediately below us have a saintly man here from Hyderabad, and maybe he knows something. So I went downstairs, and I said, I'd like to study Ayurveda, and the saintly man said, what a great idea. And he introduced me to Mr. Fazl Boy, who was an industrialist there in Bombay, and Mr. Fazl Boy said, I think that what you should do is meet Pandit Shiv Sharma, who I know from Rotary Club South here in Bombay. And Pandit Shiv Sharma was India's most eminent Ayurvedic doctor of that time. He had been elected to Indian Parliament on 2 occasions solely for the purpose of regularizing Ayurvedic education. So I went to Pandit Shiv Sharma's office. I said I'd like to study Ayurveda, and he said, you're in luck because the Tilak Ayurveda Mahavidyalaya of Pune is going to have a batch in the medium of English and beginning this coming May, and all you have to do is study a bunch of Sanskrit in 9 months, but that's a long time, and you're a young man, you'll be able to figure it out. Good luck to you. And handed me a letter that said, please admit the student instantly. And I went to Poona, and I went to the college, and this was the first time any kind of non-Indian had showed up in the college, and I said, look, I'm joining the college. Here's my letter from Pandit Shiv Sharma, and he says I have to join. And of course, he was the kind of person that could not be denied, so they all grumbled and looked at me as if I was trouble embodied come to land upon their heads. But they could not do anything, so they had to admit me, and they turned me over to Dr. Vasant Lard, who at that time was the low man on the totem pole there, and they figured that Dr. Lard, who was one of the few people there who could speak decent English, Dr. Lard would have to take care of me, and if anything went wrong, Dr. Lard could be blamed. So I entered the college, and I studied all the information. I took all the exams, and I'm good at taking exams, so I was on the top of the university all during the time I was there, and I won the gold medal, and then I graduated in 1980, and there I was. And then I proceeded ahead. In India, if you want to study, you have to go back physically to your home country to get your visa there. So at the time I went back to the US to get my visa to study in the Ayurvedic college, my parents happened to be living outside of Chicago. So the American Medical Association is headquartered in Chicago, so I went into the Loop one day and went to their office, and I said, what do you know about Ayurveda? And they conferred among themselves for a while, and they said, we don't really know anything. We think it's a tribal system from somewhere, but we don't know anything. That was approximately the level of awareness of Ayurveda back 40 years ago. By the time I graduated, there had been a slight increase in the awareness of Ayurveda, and I simply came over to the US and started to talk to anybody who would listen to me talk, particularly in yoga studios and for people who were already studying something having to do with India. Some of them had heard about Ayurveda and had realized that it was something that, in fact, complemented yoga very well. They're, after all, sister sciences. They're both concerned with having the prana circulate as best as possible so that the digestive fire, physical as well as non-physical, will be enhanced to its maximum in the organism so that health will be promoted and maintained. And it was a matter of simply meeting people and finding out who was interested in themselves and trying to give them a different perspective than perhaps they had had before on how to look at themselves. In particular, using the three doshas, which are the most commonly employed terms in the Ayurvedic world. The three doshas being three forces that encourage activity to occur in the body. The vata is the kinetic principle, and kapha is the potential principle, or the anabolic principle, if vata is the catabolic principle, and pitta is in between the two, mediating between them. So it was a matter very much of simply finding people who were interested in listening and getting them to listen. And since I like telling stories, that wasn't that much difficult. It is a sad truth that very few people ever bother to concern themselves with their health until they are already unwell. It was always natural that this was the case, especially when you're young, because no matter what people tell you and no matter what you see in front of you, a young person is always convinced that he or she is immortal. And unfortunately, very often they proceed ahead until they are convinced otherwise by personal experience. The that sad reality has been made even sadder by the fact that in the modern world, we are eating food that is very abnormal. We're breathing air that is very polluted. Everything that we are taking in has been affected in some way by civilization and affected in negative ways. And so from a young age, children are overstimulated, overfed, oversugarified, and excess is provided to them from a very early age. So, and that's why we see now children as young as 8 or 9 or 10 falling ill, not with juvenile diabetes, which certainly used to be a problem, but with the kind of diabetes that in the past you only saw in people who were much, much older, who had developed the disease as a result of unhealthy lifestyle for quite a long period of time. In the past, it used to be the case that often a person would not become interested until he or she was himself or herself unwell. But now people see lots of their friends and family becoming unwell, and many children becoming very unwell at a very early age, and the so-called healthcare system in this country is breaking down to such an extent that people are looking for all kinds of different answers. And Ayurveda provides very simple, very common sense, and very effective answers when it comes to the question of how can I live healthily? Before we think about treating disease, we should be thinking about preventing it, not detecting it early, which is what is as good as modern medicine can do, but predicting what kind of diseases a person is likely to get and making them understand that if they change the way that they live and the way that they behave and the way that they look at life in general, that they can actually alter their conditions before they need to fall ill. At this stage in my life, I've proceeded recently from being semi-retired to mostly retired. So I will still see the occasional patient, though these are inevitably those who I have already seen in the past. I'm not taking any new patients. I certainly would be happy to continue doing that, but one needs to acknowledge that as one becomes less young, I prefer not to think of myself as becoming older, as one becomes less young, there is more attention that needs to be paid to the organism and to the amount of rest that's necessary and to the fact that you have to be much choosier about what you invest your energy in when you know that you have a reduced amount of time remaining to you in which you can effectively expect to be able to do things. As I have become less young, I have found that it's more necessary for me to be doing things to maintain my own health and to be able to continue to do many of the things that I like to do. Probably the most important of these is simply awareness of prana, to be aware of how the prana is circulating in the body, and when somehow it is not circulating well, to alter what I do or what I eat or how I think in such a way that that can be alleviated. For me, this means paying attention to how the prana actually is circulating in my system, and in addition to paying attention to my own horoscope, as I have been a student of Jyotish, of Indian astrology, for many decades now, and I find it very effective when it comes to understanding the sorts of influences that are likely to promote unwellness in individuals according to how different planets influence you at different times. Though I do make it a point not to study my own horoscope too often, because as my Jyotish mentor is fond of saying, never study your horoscope too much, study other people's horoscopes, make them miserable. Because if you look at a horoscope long enough, you can find all kinds of problems that are likely to supervene, and it's better not to know. It's good to know what's going on, but perhaps better not to know too much. I also make it a point to do some kind of pranic circulation via different methods, but I especially like a variety of yoga called shadow yoga. And I've been fortunate not only to know Chandra Ramete, the founder of shadow yoga, but many shadow yoga teachers. And I particularly like this kind of yoga because it focuses on circulation of prana and encouraging the prana to become well established in the body. In addition to that, I spend a certain amount of time singing, which I have always liked to do, and chanting Sanskrit, which I have always liked to do. I certainly believe that having a regular practice of meditation is important, so I fit some of that into my day. A vigorous exercise I enjoy, perhaps not as much as many people, but I certainly am on the move a lot, so I make it a point to try to walk up to an hour a day. And so I move around quite a bit, so I often find myself in new places. And the very act of being in a new place and having to adapt to new people and new food and new environments itself is a good way to stay alert and to stay young, because part of what it is to be young is to be adaptable. And the longer you can remain adaptable in any way, the longer your organism is likely to remain able to adapt, to maintain its ability to adapt. Several people have said to me, here you are moving all around the planet from hither to thither and thither to yon, and that's not a very Ayurvedic lifestyle. And I say to them, indeed, you're correct. But there are various reasons that I find important to me that has caused me to adapt to this lifestyle. I don't suggest it to anyone else. But the fact is that Ayurveda is about accepting the reality of whoever it is that you are and whatever it is that you do, and finding a way to address that reality. So yes, Ayurveda was developed at a time when people frequently did not move even 50 kilometers from their birthplace during their entire lives. And there are still people like that. And I'm sure I have, some of my relatives have never left the state of Texas. But that is a reality that is not my personal reality. Yes, it's better from the Ayurvedic point of view to be in one place, because that allows you to establish patterns of behavior that become routines, that become positive habits. And these routines and positive habits help to structure yourself in time and space, helps to structure the prana in your system so that it's more likely to maintain itself as prana instead of vata. So even though my own personal daily routine may vary from day to day, because my moving from place to place causes me to experience different time zones and different cycles of light and dark, and sometimes being in an airport, and sometimes being in someone else's house, and sometimes being in a hotel, I've tried to find certain things that I can do, including pranic circulation, yoga practice, meditation, etc., that I can do that are, even if they're not optimal, even if they don't follow the letter of the text, they still provide me with what any of these habits and routines are providing to other people, which is a pattern that allows the body to establish for itself a certain kind of equilibrium. And I find that provided that I get adequate rest, especially sleep, that I can maintain, generally speaking, my own equilibrium. But as I say, this is not the kind of lifestyle I advise to other people, because it would not be easy for most people to live this kind of lifestyle and remain balanced. As one proceeds through one's life, learns various useful things, has many experiences, because they say that if a person who is a physician or an astrologer, for such a person, the entire world is his or her laboratory. So it's necessary to go out and see how people live, even when how they are living is not very healthy or not very attractive or not very easy to see. After seeing all of that and doing all of that, certain things remain mysterious. And one of those things is the prana itself. How does the prana, how does it invigorate the body? How does it move in the body? How does it invigorate the mind? How does it inspire what happens in the organism? And how does it inspire the different aspects of the organism in different ways? It has been said about the human being that the human being is an animal with a large number of different personalities with no particular control over how any one of those personalities might manifest at any one moment. So understanding how, in fact, human beings work and how there is an intersection between personality and how these personalities assemble one another. I like to read, and I've read all the Carlos Castaneda books, and one of the things that Don Juan said, if in fact he actually existed, and to me it doesn't matter whether he did or not, because many of the things written in the books are very interesting. One concept that I find particularly interesting is the concept that everyone has an assemblage point, a point around which all of what they know and all of what they feel and all of how they interact with the world is focused, and that can be anywhere in the organism. It's that point of focus around which everything else is constellated. So that's one thing I'm very interested in. How does a point of focus develop, an assemblage point, and how can they shift, and how can you promote them to move in a direction that's beneficial for the organism? And there, as far as I can see, is no end to the study of Ayurveda or of astrology or of Tantra or of music or of any of these other vidyas that have been studied for thousands of years already and will be studied very likely for indefinitely into the future. And so I don't think I'll have any trouble keeping myself busy until I end up disconnecting myself from this reality and moving on to the next phase. I've been very fortunate in my life to have been exposed to some of the best teachers in whatever subject I was interested in studying. In the case of yoga, I studied briefly with Mr. Angar, but much more with Mr. Angar's students, in particular Jandur Ramete, from whom I've learned a great deal. And I've studied astrology with Mr. Hart Defoe and his teacher, Mantriji, and I was fortunate enough to study what little I know of Sanskrit chanting, etc., with some of the best Sanskrit pundits in India. And I was very fortunate to have been at the Ayurvedic College in Poona when Vaidya B.P. Nanal was still teaching there. And I've known Dr. Vasant Lad, who possibly is the best known Ayurvedic doctor in the world today. I've known him ever since I moved there in 1974, and I've had advantage of being exposed to him. But I've been able to take advantage of all of these excellent teachers because of my main mentor, who elects to go by the name of Vimalananda. He was a householder, a grihasti in Bombay, but he was, and a racehorse owner, thoroughbreds, but he was also an agori. He also spent time in the cremation grounds and consumed all kinds of intoxicants and did all kinds of unusual things with various spirits, etc. And he was a devotee of bhakti, of the devotion path of yoga. He introduced me to his guru, Sri Jatpal Sadhu Ram Vishwambar Das. I was very fortunate in so many ways, but most fortunate by knowing Vimalananda, not because only of what he taught me, but because of how he taught me to move through the world and to and the attitude that he fostered in me of always being open to anything that the universe might choose to introduce to me and show me how to interact with. So he not only taught me things, but he also, most especially, taught me how to learn about even more things. When I think about advice that I could give people on how to live well, there are so many things that I could say, but I keep coming back to advice that my mentor, Vimalananda, gave to me. And he was fond of the Pithy saying, and particularly Pithy sayings often in groups of 3. So in fact, there are 3 groups of 3 that I can offer. Number 1, just from the perspective of being healthy, he always said you should keep your body moving, keep your breath moving, keep your bowels moving. Make sure that things don't get stuck in your digestive tract. Make sure that you're continuing to breathe well and exchange gases and intake prana. And make sure that you're doing enough movement, enough exercise, that your physical body is getting the proper amount, not too much and not too little of stimulation. And he also said that every morning when you wake up, you should always say 3 things to yourself. Number 1, thank you, universe, for letting me be alive again for one more day. Number 2, this may be the day that I die and I should be prepared for that. And number 3, let me go through this day, whatever may be in front of me, without cheating my awareness, without doing something that is violating what I know to be true, without violating the dictates of my conscience. And at night, he would say there are 3 questions that everyone should ask themselves. Have I lived? Have I loved? Have I laughed? Have I actually felt like that I took advantage of everything that I could take advantage of during the day and really lived my life to the fullest? Have I loved the people that love me, and have I loved the people that do not love me, in fact, who may hate me? Have I made sure that I have always done my best, as far as possible, understanding that I'm a limited human being, to love in general whoever it is that I interact with? And have I laughed at all of my own human limitations and not taken myself too seriously? So I think if you keep up with those 9 pieces of advice, there's every reason to believe that at the very least, you will be doing something useful for yourself in a positive way. Thank you.